Good afternoon, everyone. I will call this meeting, August 25th of Luneburg Town Council to order. It's 2 o'clock and we have an extremely full agenda. So we will get right down to it. But before we do that, I just want to make our formal acknowledgement that we are in the town of Luneburg in Mi'kma'ki, which is known as the unceded and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And moving on then to our first item of business, it is the approval of our agenda with the caveat that it's all the bolded items are priority and will get tended to earlier or given priority status. So Councillor Risser's moving the approval of the agenda, I believe. Yes, with that hand indication, seconded by Councillor Bachman. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Worship, I wonder if 8A could be maybe bolded in that it's expected to come back from all of the municipal councils back to the REMO meeting on September the 21st. And so it may be that we haven't had a chance to go through it in any depth, so we could make it a provisional approval, you know, to submit it within a week or so if we don't get any feedback from it or something like that. But if we don't approve it at this, I don't know if we would have time in the next meeting to get it back to them by the 21st of next month. So should be a very short edition, I think, if we have to.
Okay, it is on the agenda, so we can add it to our priority list if there's no objection from other members of council. With the understanding that I do think we would, with the schedule, our committee's council schedule, we should have one other opportunity to get it looked after. But by all means, we can add that. I'll start it on mine. So with that addition to the priorities, are we ready for the question? All in favor? The agenda and the motion is carried with all in agreement. So the agenda is approved and we will move right to that. The meeting minutes of August 28th and 18th are next in line for approval. So is there a motion to approve those meeting minutes? Councillor Mosier, thank you. Moving, seconded by Councillor Croft, thank you. Any errors or omissions? No side commentary, hearing none. All in favor? Motion is carried with all in agreement. No one being contrary minded. Thank you. So following that, we have a presentation slated for today, and this is the much anticipated and an initiative that we've taken pride in being a part of. And so we look forward to the presentation of the Luneburg Cultural Action Plan, which is being presented, I understand, by Rebecca Kahn, consultant with the company that undertook this on our behalf and on behalf of the Luneburg Foundation for the Arts. And so Sheila Woodcock, I believe, is here in a supporting role as well. So I look forward to hearing from them and look to Ms. McCallum to perhaps get these folks lined up if that's possible. And if we need to give them some more time, we can move along if need be.
I'm actually having some difficulty connecting them, Rachel, if you wouldn't mind, please, Your Worship, rather, if you wouldn't mind, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. You can give me a note and I'll try to pay attention to the chat stream when they're available to us, and we'll carry on with the items of priority otherwise. So I'm going to move past the correspondence just to ensure we get to the items that are prioritized today. And under business arising and corporate services, we have municipal and CSAP elections 2020, alternative voting bylaw election draft resolution before us for approval. And that is Mr. Burke, I believe, is here to speak to that. I believe it is fairly straightforward. And just a
Yes, Your
confirmation.
Worship. The reason for the resolution, it's a confirming resolution because you will recall that we passed the alternative voting bylaw on July 28th, but a bylaw doesn't become effective until it's published, which was the following week in the paper. And because I was concerned that we weren't going to have a council meeting immediately, we passed resolutions dealing with saying we were only going to have electronic voting and having the advanced poll days and determining the alternative voting days from October 8th to October 17th. So someone might suggest, okay, well, technically you don't have the authority to make those decisions until the alternative voting bylaw is in place. So this is just confirming those resolutions.
Okay, so there are two separate resolutions.
No, the first one, Your Worship, is the confirming resolutions, and then we'll deal with the second one.
Okay. So the confirming resolution of council of the town of Luneburg, whereas the town has passed an alternative voting bylaw. So there is A, B, C, D, E, and whereas, and then be it resolved, A, B, C.
Yes. Yes.
So do all of council have that confirmation resolution before them? And if so, and if there's an agreement, could I have the deputy mayor's moving it and Councillor Risher's seconding the adoption of that resolution? Is there any further questions or discussion required? If not, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? And no one is. Councillor Croft, I'm not able to see you at the moment. So I'm not sure if you were voting in favor or would be contrary minded. I guess we would, I see nor hear Councillor Croft. Am I able to assume he is away and not participating in this vote? And I look to Ms. Renton for guidance. And just for reference of anyone who might not be listening in, we're not allowed to abstain, so we can't indicate an abstention on this issue, but it looks like we may have lost him. So
that would be my understanding as well, Your Worship.
okay, thank you. So motion would be carried, and I note that Councillor Croft is temporarily not with us, although we expect him to return. I assume it's a technical glitch. So then I look to Mr. Burke for clarification on the draft second resolution for today.
Yes, Your Worship. The second resolution was forwarded to the council by the CEO, and essentially what it does, council had passed a resolution on April 28th, I believe, determining the fees that would be paid to election officials such as DROs and poll clerks, and this was before we passed the bylaw. We will now have helpline officials, which may be totally, and we hope, totally town staff. What this resolution does is assigns the power to, and I don't have the exact wording right at my fingertips, revise and amend and establish the fees to be paid to workers other than the RO. And we assign that to the CAO, or the manager clerk.
Okay, so that draft resolution is in our package and for our review. Are there questions of Mr. Burke, or do we have someone who's prepared to move that resolution? And after which we can also question or debate. Moved by Councillor Risser.
Actually, I had a question.
Oh, okay.
I'll move the motion if somebody wants a second, but I do have a question when it's been moved and seconded.
Okay, there was an offer to move. Is there a seconder for the resolution? Seconded by Councillor Bachman. Thank you. And go ahead with your question, Councillor Risser.
So Pat, I'm just wondering, the systems elections officer, I assume, is an agent of IntelliVote?
No.
No.
The systems election officer, some municipal units are sort of getting together and having maybe one CAO of one municipality being the system election officer for another municipality. It was felt by staff here that it might be best to engage the people who are doing our computer support in any event in the town as our system elections officer. And so Catherine Hanks, who is I think the Vice President of Digital Ingenuity, is going to be the system elections officer. And what they do is they do tests throughout the course of the voting to determine that things are going properly, make sure that that you can't vote before 12 noon on October 8th, and do various tests on the system.
So I'm just wondering then, who holds the pen in terms of the system where all these results are going in?
Who holds the pen?
Yeah, like who is responsible for overseeing that? Would that be then internal staff, or would it be external people?
Well, technically, the returning officer is in control, but and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but what happens is IntelliVote will send out voter information letters to each elector. They will then vote using their PIN and date of birth, and that is compiled internally in IntelliVote's system. Candidates will have access to the list of electors electronically, but no access to determine, and they can actually tell, I believe, whether a person has voted, because that way they can determine whether it's worthwhile checking in to encourage them to get out and vote.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. That does answer my question. Thanks.
Okay.
So just to further clarify then, Mr. Burke, you hold that, does that information go through you, or there's a system through which IntelliVote has access to each of the candidates, or the candidates have access to that information through IntelliVote?
Yes, and I was just checking with Heather this morning exactly how that will work, but candidates will have limited access to the IntelliVote data showing who the list of electors are, and of course that's being updated from time to time, because the returning officer has the ability to add and correct names and so on up till 3 days before. And the candidates will have access to that information, and they can also tell when a person has voted. So when a PIN has voted. Because obviously if it were a paper ballot system, the candidate or their agent could go into the polls and look at the poll books and see who has voted, so that they would know whether they've got to beat the bushes to get some of their supporters out.
Yeah, and likewise, after the advance poll, there's a list generated of those who have voted in the advance poll in a traditional system. So
Exactly.
yeah, so that is available to candidates. So this would be the same, I think. Yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one more question, Pat. So this is going to be unfamiliar to a lot of people, and I think this has the potential to be a struggle for a lot of people. What are we doing to make sure everybody knows that this is, I know we've done some stuff to date, but what else are we doing to make sure that everybody knows that this is coming and we're going to be voting in a different way, and to look for those things in the mail and such?
I, through you, Your Worship, the IntelliVote has forwarded us a list of frequently asked questions, which I propose posting on the town website. There is one little change that we're going to have to make, because we're going to be doing it slightly differently with respect to replacement of pins. And I hope to get something out, ads, at least 1 or 2 ads in the paper, and something in September's electric bills, just to let people know again that, look, we will only be voting electronically because of the pandemic. We want to encourage people to vote at home or wherever it's most convenient for them. If it's necessary, or you don't have a computer or you require assistance, you can come to the town hall and vote on October 8th, 13th, and 17th. But otherwise, if you're having difficulties, you can call the helpline, and that will be staffed by Katie and backed up by Heather. And that's going to be open for certain hours on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Tuesday to Saturday. And we're also going to have a mobile poll at Harborview Haven and Fisherman's Memorial, because we're concerned that with a second wave, they may be shut down. We're going to have inside employees as the DRO and poll clerk there. We'll have it open, probably Harborview Haven, we're looking at maybe 4 hours, because they tell me there's probably only about 20 to 22 people that will vote at Harborview out of their numbers. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Risser. I think we have to get the word out that we're not doing paper voting, and we will have an ad in the paper within a week after nomination day, because that will include the names of the candidates, and will also explain that it's going to be by electronic voting only.
And so just one last question then. I'm wondering, say somebody throws out their notice or loses it or whatever, is there a way for them then to be able, when they realize that they need it, to come have it reissued?
Loses their PIN?
Yeah, well, I'm just imagining somebody thinking that that's a flyer or something and throwing it out.
Absolutely, and that will happen. And so we will, they can call the helpline, and if it's the case of a lost PIN, and we're just sorting out the details on this now, but I believe we think Heather will probably be the one that's going to be reissuing the PINs as the assistant returning officer, and she will, we can either email them to them or they can pick them up. And because we're trying to limit the in-person contact due to the pandemic, we're just trying to sort out what hours you'd be able to do that. But yes, absolutely, if you lose your PIN, we will replace it.
Gotcha. That's all the questions I have.
Are there any other questions with respect to the motion on the floor? And I see you're back with us, Councillor Croft. Assume you had some technical difficulties. I'm not sure if you've caught up with us. We are looking at the at 7A1, the second resolution under that item of our agenda. And we do have a motion on the floor to approve it. So there any other questions around the approval of that resolution or the resolution itself? There aren't any. I'd call for the vote. All in favor? And no one to oppose. So the motion is carried and the resolution is approved. And I see Ms. Woodcock is with us, but I'm not sure if they're ready to go.
Yes, Your Worship. This is Sheila.
Hi, Sheila.
We're trying to reach Rebecca. We're not sure why she's not on. I was in contact with her as recently as last night, so I don't know if she's having technical difficulties. So maybe if you could give us a few more minutes, is that possible?
Yeah, we will just continue. We will continue to carry on
Thank
with
you.
other items of our agenda and come back to you when you're ready to go. This is yeah, it just adds a little bit of complexity, this technology we're having to work within. So yeah, certainly able to give you some grace here. So
Wonder, she is in Ontario, I believe, Your Worship. I wonder if there's the time zones. I wonder if there's confusion about that.
Well, yeah, she has. I mean, she's been working here. She's been attending all kinds of Zoom meetings with the steering committee and everything. So I think she's pretty familiar with the time zone. So I don't know why we're not reaching her. Yeah, but thank you.
okay, we will give that some more time. And in the meantime, we will move on to the next bolded item of our agenda, which is moving down then to number 5 under 7A, Corporate Services, Blockhouse Hill Development Proposal, and the staff report that accompanies it. And Ms. Sutherland is here with us to perhaps give us the highlights of that extensive report you've prepared for us on this subject matter.
Now, can you hear me okay? I've got new headphones on. Okay? Okay.
You can.
You're quite low.
Okay, I don't know how to
Ms.
work this,
Sutherland.
so- Any better? I'll hold it. No?
Turn up the volume.
Okay. Okay, I've tried to turn up the volume. Is it better?
I
A little.
I can
little
hear
better.
you. Yeah.
You can, okay.
Speak up.
I will speak up, yell into the, the thing. So Blockhouse Hill, this is this plot of land has been identified over a number of years as an area for residential housing. It's also been identified for, if you go to page 181, Heather, that would be great. Affordable housing. And also recently by a private developer has expressed interest in developing 2 multi-unit buildings, so 2 apartment buildings at the base of the hill. Council has asked for just an outline of some things they can consider when we're looking to develop this land. So on page 181, you got it, thank you, Heather. There are 3 lots that we're talking about here. There is a 4th lot you can see that's between the bypass road and the trail, but I haven't included that in this discussion, but it is a town-owned lot. The large lot, number 1, is zoned residential and recreation, so that the campground is in recreation. The second lot I'll call Saw Pit Lot. It has access on Saw Pit Road. That's a residential zone. And then there's a small lot in comparison, number 3, off behind 82 Kemp Street. So this is directly behind Ted Kelly's house. So in total, we have about 21 acres that we're talking about, 8.5 hectares. I should, before I started, I should have said that council has not made a decision on whether to move forward with selling Blockhouse Hill or developing it. This is just more exploratory at the time. In council report, I have a number of just questions that you may want to consider. For example, does council wish to make the development of these lands for residential purposes a priority in their next budget? Does council wish to approve a concept design through an RFP in advance? Or do we simply want to go with the new subdivision bylaw and the new land use bylaw that will be out? So those are things to consider. I've listed some issues as well, and it's by no means exhaustive. The first one, we have a draft comprehensive community plan that is not yet approved by council. It has identified the lack of housing in the town. So yes, this is a pertinent issue for the council to look at. Also, the areas, number 1 is in the draft comprehensive community plan, it's slated for residential expansion. And number 2, Saw Pit is also residentially zoned. So there's no issue with zoning or with the comprehensive community plan in terms of, does this fit with the plan? Yes, residential development of these lands does fit. Heritage, again, is a consideration. Part of these lands up behind Ted Kelly's 3, and if you loop down to the unopened right away to Creighton Street, that's in a Heritage Conservation District. So some of these lands are in Heritage Conservation District. The whole parcel itself is owned by the town, and it's considered a buffer area for the World Heritage Site. So I would strongly suggest if we move forward with developing these lands, that an evaluation be done in terms of the impact on the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site. So implications on the outstanding universal value. And the comprehensive community plan has identified this as there should be a transition area between Old Town and any new development. We have, how do we want to sell this? Do we want to sell this as it is at market value as assigned by the PVSC? Most of it is tax exempt. There was an error in the staff report. Some of this land in the large lot is taxable. It's $670,000 worth of taxable on lot 1 right now. But we're looking at combined of the 3 lots, just over $500,000 in value. And do we want to actually hire an appraiser and have this reevaluated? 2 of the lots are not migrated, so we can't sell them yet. We'd have to migrate them, and we may want to survey them. And if we, there's also the issue of the campground. What are we going to do with that? Another thing to consider is impact on other subdivisions in the town and other land sales. This is a prime lot. If we have another subdivision somewhere else coming online, this would be in direct competition. Traffic study would be required, and the town would have to pay for this under the current land use bylaw. And any recommendations that would come out of the traffic studies, such as road improvements, sidewalk, if we get into sidewalk, we get into curb and gutter as well. So those are costs. Do we want to put a sidewalk there? What's the impact on the old town, the character of the old town if we put sidewalks there? Also, developing the infrastructure. Right now, it's the responsibility of the developer to facilitate development. Do we want to cost share in it? It's very expensive to put down new roads and subdivide them up. So that's something we need to think about. Do we want to provide additional information, such as on fire flows and water pressure? We have to look at the capacity of our sewer system, which Public Works is working on now. So there are a number of things to consider before we sell these lots, or these 3 lots. But first of all, I want to say, yes, there is value in keeping it as it is. It has intrinsic value. Open space, is valued. Naturalized areas are valued. So there is value in keeping it as vacant lands, open space, parkland, but there also is value in developing it as well. Council will have to turn their mind to how much influence they want to have over the development itself. Do we simply want to go with the land use bylaw and the subdivision bylaw, or do you want to go through an RFP process where council approves of a concept design? There's perhaps more community input on it, those types of things. Are we going to address affordable housing? Are we going to, partner with community groups such as Plan B and develop affordable housing on the site? So there are a number of questions that council needs to turn their mind to. The first one would be, do you want to develop for residential purposes? That would be a decision of council that's not yet been made. And what lands are to be developed? Do we want to develop them all? There's a campground. Do we want to consolidate the lands and sell them? Do you want staff to come back with scenarios? Do you want us to, if you would assign this as a project, do you want some preliminary costing done, such as just preliminary, like how much is it going to cost to migrate? How much is it going to cost to survey? Are we going to subdivide out a lot? How much is the traffic study? Infrastructure, those types of things. I'm trying to go as fast as I can. So staff would need direction on what the next steps that council would like to see. I know this is a lot of information for council to digest in such a short period of time, with such a fast presentation on such a tight schedule today. But I do ask, do you want to develop it? What do you want to develop? And what would you like to see of staff coming back?
Thanks. Thanks very much, Ms. Sutherland. So this, as just noted, is provided for our information. There is, a developer who has expressed interest in certain portion of the land that's there. The diagram that was displayed, or the map, or the photo of that defines the area, also points out that there are some other developable spaces, just neighboring that particular plot of land as well. I guess that sort of speaks to the infill part of the possibilities. So yeah, so I would open the floor then for questions, comments, further direction. Yes, Councillor Mosher.
Thank you, Worship. Just one of the things that Don pointed out, like that one lot is not migrated. So regardless of what we do with that, wouldn't it be a good idea to at least proceed with the migration of that lot of land? Because that needs to be done no matter, really, it's just good housekeeping to have that done, period, no matter what we do with the land.
Through the mayor, yes, there are 2 lots that are not migrated, so they would need to be migrated by an LR lawyer, which Mr. Burke is.
Yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Worship. I don't know how other councillors feel, but I think we should not be issuing the RFP until we have a new land use bylaw for starters. I agree with Councillor Mosher that I think it's useful to proceed with some of the housekeeping matters that are just good form, whether or not, regardless of whatever we do with the space, surveying and migrating and all the rest of it. And the only other comment I'd offer at this stage is I think given that Project Luneburg has recommended at some point in the long-term future repurposing the campground, that we should think about the space comprehensively, so that we're not doing it in bits and pieces and dribs and drabs and winding up with a bunch of different plans that don't really fit together. And as far as your comments, Don, I'd be open to seeing some scenarios that align with what we're doing in terms of future direction.
Deputy Mayor.
Your Worship, there's a lot of questions there, and a lot of discussion that has to happen. So, but one thing that I think that regardless of what path we take has to happen is, it may not be bits and pieces, but I think we should get it surveyed with the idea of separating off the campground and the Board of Trade area from the lower portion, because I think that's going to that has to happen anyways. And so that would give, I think, the Board of Trade some confidence that they're safe for the foreseeable future. And also we couldn't put out an RFP, for instance, without having that done. So I mean, I guess I can't see us doing much more than that. Maybe the migration of the 2 properties, and at least getting some idea on what it's going to cost to survey it, and break off the portions that we would want to leave, with the Board of Trade for now.
So any further comments, questions? Yes, Councillor Bachman.
Thanks, Your Worship. I think I'm just sort of echoing what's already been said with Councillor Risser and the Deputy Mayor. I think we need to proceed, but we need to proceed slowly. There's not a lot of money in the budget next year to do a lot of these things, but we do need to do our due diligence and make sure things are surveyed and migrated. And we know what we're up against as far as some of the other studies for capacity for water and sewer and all those things. So I think those questions need to be asked and looked at before we go down the road of issuing any kind of an RFP, just to make sure that we are in good standing, that we can do what we'd like to be able to do.
So I'd appreciate clarification on migration, what that involves, and do we know cost? Is there sort of a set cost for that, or is it dependent on the size of the parcel of land, or what does that involve, and how big an expense is that, and likewise with the survey, I guess what we determine just where the boundary lines are, where our the property stop and start? Is that what we would obtain from a survey? And perhaps Ms. Sutherland can help
That's
clarify.
right. I don't know how much the migration, that's a guarantee of title. It's not a survey. And that's the lawyers. I mean, my house was $1,000 12 years ago or 15 years ago. Yeah. So I don't know how much that would be now. But I can certainly get that cost from Mr. Burke. And for surveying, I would have to get a quote on that for sure.
Is it understood that those are kind of the first steps that would need to be taken regardless of what happens next? Is that a fair?
The migration certainly is. You can't sell it without it being migrated.
So perhaps if there was a motion to have that done, or at least even to get a quotation on it, that would be helpful. Yes, Councillor Mosier.
Oh, I would move that we have those properties migrated, at the earliest convenience.
Moved by Councillor Mosier, seconded by Councillor Risser. And I guess my question in looking to see where we are with that in support of the motion or not is, do we know if we have the money to do that? We're not very flush this year. We're going to have financial challenges, and I don't know, not knowing for sure the extent of the expense, I would feel more comfortable knowing that before approving moving forward. Yes.
Your worship, Mr. Burke and Ms. Dagley are both on the line, so I think they could probably help us with that.
Okay, you see again. Who wants to go first?
Perhaps Mr. Burke, if you could tell us the cost or an estimate of the cost.
Your worship, Mr. Luchak would likely be doing that in our firm. I would suggest that we probably have a conflict in relation to the proposal by the individual in question. But generally, with respect to migrations, I expect that it's going to roughly be in the neighborhood of 11 to 1,400 plus any disbursements per lot.
Okay, so over to you, Ms. Dagley.
So certainly, well, your worship, we could consider, because this land is essentially held as part of our capital assets for the town, it could come from the capital reserve and be added to that land cost that is, rather than coming out of the operating budget. So there are some options for funding this work if council wished to proceed.
Great, good to know. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
No, thank you, Lisa. It saved me from having to remind you that during the budget deliberations, I made a point of this, that, would there be reserves that we could draw on should something arise? And so thank you for confirming that. That's all I want to say.
Great.
We haven't talked about the survey though, and maybe that's a separate motion. Or I think all we want at this point, all I would like to see is what would the costs be? And even before we do that, we'd almost have to be able to tell them where the delineation is. And I would, as far as just getting a cost on doing the survey, I would be fine with staff sort of outlining, the campground area and separating that from the bottom portion of lot 1. So.
Yeah, was it included in your lot 1, Ms. Sutherland? I'm not, the campground, it was all part of that.
Part
Okay.
of lot 1, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the motion right now just speaks to migration and moving ahead with that. So perhaps we could, if there aren't any further questions on that, we would have a vote on that motion as it stands. So if everyone's prepared, all in favor? And I think there was anyone left to oppose. That's unanimously approved. So would there be further questions on this issue? Yes, Mr. Councillor Risser and then Councillor Mosier.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I'm just wondering, to Dawn's point, does it make sense for us to give her direction to do some scenario planning? Because I find if we get into a discussion about all these different options on a, like a to-do list, I think it would take probably 8 hours. So it might be helpful to expedite that with a little bit of scenario planning from our planner.
Dawn, did you want to respond to that, or I can move on to Councillor Mosier?
What I would do is I'd do land configuration scenarios and bring it back to council with the surveying quotes.
The quotes would differ according to the scenario then? Is that what you're suggesting?
right.
Okay. Councillor Mosier?
Thanks, Your Worship. Well, just a comment in regard to, we ask all these questions. Well, we don't know if we have, water, sewer capacity to do all that. But really, at the end of the day, wouldn't that be up to the developer to figure that out? Because why are we going to do their work for them? If I'm a developer and I'm going to put just say 75 houses on that lot, and I can't get water and sewer to them, not going to be many people buying them. I mean, they have to be able to warrant their property. So, we're always trying to do someone else's work for them. So, I mean, if this is worth developing and we're going to put say we put an RFP out for it, unless we're developing it ourselves, why not let them do the work for us? I mean, we keep, asking questions we can't answer, or questions that someone else might very likely be quite happy to answer and can probably do it faster and more efficiently than we can.
I think perhaps Ms. Sutherland can speak to that, but I think most as that typically is the work of a developer, or at least part of that is to determine water flows and fire flows and capacities and so on. Yeah, so you're right. We wouldn't want to move ahead to try to answer some of those things without a developer plan and their confirmation that our system can supply what they're looking to develop. So we're not moving that far ahead.
And just to, Councilor Risser's point, I think, probably with, to be consistent with the new land use bylaws, it's probably best to have those in hand, and then we'll know what kind of development can be possible there, for the future.
And I was just going to say further to that point and to the idea of scenario planning, is it correct to assume then that the scenario planning would be somewhat based on our preliminary understanding of what's moving ahead by way of land use from the comprehensive community plan draft? Is that, or where do you come up with those things?
Yeah, that's right, Your Worship. It wouldn't be detailed. It wouldn't be down to the lot size. It'd be more like an overall, it would be more for the surveying and the cost. It wouldn't be down to the detail of what goes where. We should wait for the new land use bylaw and subdivision bylaw. It's not going to be in detail. It's going to be more aggregates, like how much is it going to cost to survey the whole thing? How much is it going to cost to take out the campground, and how much land do they need for that? Those types of things. It's going to be broad.
Okay. So we don't, there's been a suggestion made, but not a motion at this point. So yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I had basically the same question you did about whether it was premature to do that. But my understanding now from Dawn is that it's not premature for you to do land configuration scenarios for this space. Okay, then I would move that we direct Dawn to do those scenarios.
So to come back at a subsequent meeting with some idea of potential land use configurations, is that the fair term or correct one? Okay, is there a seconder for that direction then by motion? Yes, seconded by Councillor Mosier. Thanks. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
And would that include, Don, just getting an estimate on survey costs? I think that's what you said earlier, that you could do some scenarios and then get a quote on what it would cost to survey it.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we, yes, Mr. Burke, like to weigh in?
Your worship, if you are getting a survey, you may wish to consider getting topographical information on the survey as well, because that is a very hilly lot. And that information would be exceedingly valuable in determining siting for buildings as well as roadways and sewer and water.
Thank you. Would that then be automatically, do we need to dictate that, Ms. Sutherland, or is that something that you would do in this?
I'll get that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Councillor Risser.
Well, I just, to Pat's point, I wonder, Dawn, we would be getting that as part of all the mapping that's going on for the comprehensive plan, would we not?
Not to that detail.
Okay.
Not to that detail. No.
And perhaps Ms. Renton could remind us or let us know if there was any of that kind of work done in the former planning for part of Blockhouse Hill. Was there any of this information that would be accessible to us? I mean, the land wouldn't have changed that much in that many years.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, Your Worship. I would probably defer to Dawn to see if any of it was recorded at the Registry of Deeds, or now the Land Registry. There was some very preliminary work, and there would be some topographical information, to Mr. Burke's point, that would be helpful background information. I don't recall that any of it was specifically surveyed, but we'll certainly check, Your Worship, because there's no point going over work that's already been done. So your point's well taken.
Great, thank you. Okay, any further questions or in this direction for staff? So I'll
I'll try to read the motion, Your Worship.
Yes,
I'm just thinking,
please.
might not hurt. Okay. So moved by Councillor Risser, seconded by Councillor Mosier, that we direct the Planning and Development Manager to do land use configuration scenarios for council consideration. This will include survey work, including topographical information, cost sharing estimates for these lot configurations.
And I'd look to Ms. Sutherland whether or not that's what if that language captures.
What do you mean by cost sharing for configuration?
For council consideration?
Cost sharing would come from whom?
I didn't say cost sharing. Yeah. Topical information cost estimates for these lot configurations.
Right.
I apologize if I misspoke, but it was cost estimates.
Okay, good.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So if everyone's clear, we have a vote on the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? So the motion is carried. Thank you. And great. So having concluded that item of business, I had received an indication earlier that we have our guests had logged on. So if unless we've lost them, there we go. I would introduce then Rebecca Kahn, who's going to speak to us about the Luneburg Cultural Action Plan and share their good work with us now. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of council. And my abject apologies for my pandemic brain that forgot we have a time difference in our country. So I do apologize for this delay, but thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. And I believe that Heather is going to pull up a presentation that we've made available to talk through our cultural action plan. So next slide, please. As you know, my name is Rebecca Kahn. I'm with Janice A. Barlow and Associates. I was the lead consultant on the process that developed the Luneburg Cultural Action Plan that we're presenting today. With me is Sheila Woodcock, who is president of the Luneburg Foundation for the Arts and has been chair of the steering committee that oversaw the plan's development. Next slide. Our planning process was initiated by the Luneburg Foundation for the Arts, and it was led by the Luneburg Cultural Action Steering Committee that was made up of representatives from music, theater, visual arts, the library, festivals, museums, and heritage. Artists, paid cultural workers, and unpaid volunteers all contributed to this process as part of the committee and through a variety of other ways that I will describe a little later on. The actual names of all of the steering committee members can be found in our culture plan on page 11. Next slide, please. So cultural vitality ultimately is our goal. And the goal of any culture plan is to enliven and enrich and ensure cultural vitality in a community. So we defined cultural vitality in our plan as a future in Luneburg where, next slide please, residents and visitors continue to be inspired by Luneburg's remarkable history, natural landscapes, built heritage, and abundance of arts and festival experiences. Next slide. Inclusivity is prioritized in decision-making. Diverse voices and new and different faces are welcomed at all tables, and the Mi'kmaq are participating in community life. Next slide. Professional artists and cultural workers are building businesses. They are strengthening existing facilities and organizations and events, and they are fostering innovation. Next slide. Residents of all ages participate in the cultural life of Luneburg as leaders, learners, fun seekers, and as community builders. And finally, last slide, local government, the private sector, and the not-for-profit cultural sector work together to support, grow, leverage, and integrate cultural activity into long-term community sustainability. Next slide, please. So our process began with the local community. We engaged Luneburg residents through several forums that are listed on the screen, and we undertook research on the cultural sector using resources online through the information that we gathered in interviews and surveys, as well as through the steering committee. Next slide, please. We did work with Upland Planning and Design to maximize our collective resources. Our team provided the arts and culture expertise behind the 2 reports produced as part of Project Luneburg, the Arts and Culture discussion paper, and the What We Heard paper. In turn, Upland Planning provided specialized analysis and mapping using baseline information we gave them, and played a key role in sharing information with the local community and engaging them in a follow-up roundtable. It was an extremely positive working relationship, and I would like to thank Erica Brooke and her team at Upland Planning and Design, as well as the Project Luneburg Steering Committee for their willingness to collaborate. It was a very positive experience. Next slide. So, what's in the plan? Next slide. We defined culture, and this is in your community-based plan now as well, using 4 different definitions. We took this wide approach because culture is a term that means different things to different people. So the detailed definitions of these can be found in our plan on pages 15 and 16, and they are also found in the Project Luneburg plan. Next slide, please. We have a series of findings, and we've just summarized a few of them on 2 slides here for you. The full extent of our findings can be found in the Project Luneburg discussion paper. You know that Luneburg is a major cultural hub. not only for Nova Scotia, but for Canada. The cultural sector, for-profit and not-for-profit, play a major role in the economic vitality and cultural richness of the town. The UNESCO designated Old Town, the Working Harbor, the Blue Nose 2, the Fisheries Museum, and the many festivals, art galleries, and arts education experiences that exist in your community are remarkable, locally as well as from a national and an international perspective. Next slide. We did find weaknesses as well, including but not limited to what we have on screen. The cultural sector is affected by the shortage of rental housing that others are experiencing in the high season. The sector is also heavily reliant on volunteers, some of whom expressed concerns of burnout during our interviews. Local theater and dance activity are not well served by the venues available to them. There is no civic art gallery, and more diversity in community engagement was identified as a priority. Finally, with so much going on in Luneburg, there is no one body that is monitoring and supporting the full breadth of the cultural sector, which includes for-profit, not-for-profit, arts, heritage, cultural diversity, recreation, festivals, education, tourism, and community engagement. Next slide, please. We've proposed 5 strategic directions, and these fundamentally build on your strengths, because Luneburg has a lot of strengths when it comes to culture. So these 5 strategic directions are listed here, are adding to what you already do well as filling in some of the gaps. Next slide, please. Each strategic direction has 2 or 3 goals attached to it, and these are addressed through action items that can be short, mid, or long-term in nature, and they can be high or low in complexity. The steering committee has identified who would ideally be involved in each action item, and we've worked to identify resources to support them as well. It is a lot, but you have a big and active and vibrant cultural sector. So, next slide, please. The first question really is, where do we begin? Like any major endeavor, collaboration, support, and interaction are key, which is why I've put goal number 15 on the screen. We know the implementation of this plan needs the support of the town, as well as the Board of Trade. And the cultural sector needs an ongoing roundtable that fully represents the diversity of culture in Luneburg. Town Council's endorsement of this plan is a critical part of accessing resources to support implementation. Provincial and federal government grants are available and will continue to be so in the wake of COVID-19. The cultural sector is recognized now more than ever as playing an important economic role, as well as a social well-being role, building community mindedness, bringing people together in person and online, and providing much needed relaxation and release during challenging times. Next slide, please. Our request to you today is that Town Council endorse the Cultural Action Plan in principle, and that the town work with the Cultural Roundtable to investigate resource opportunities, support implementation of the plan, and identify other partners to support the plan. Next slide. We want to thank you for being one of the funders of the Luneburg Cultural Action Plan. On behalf of the steering committee, I would also like to recognize the Nova Scotia Government, Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage, and the Luneburg Foundation for the Arts, as well as the town of Luneburg, because we couldn't have done this without you. Final slide, please. Cultural vitality is alive and well in Luneburg. The Cultural Action Plan is designed to support the continuance of this by building on your assets, monitoring the sector, increasing inclusivity, and planning for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for that very very concise and interesting highlighting of the plan. The plan is a wonderful document, and congratulate Sheila and the Foundation for the Arts for carrying on, leading us through this process, and Rebecca and your firm that you're associated with, Janice Barlow, for the work done from afar. It's always an interesting, I think, result when we have folks that come from away and work within the community. And I know you were present here a number of times and spoke with you about, and I think the comments with respect to the strengths of the community even in comparison to or throughout the province and the country, and even you noted internationally, is significant. So thanks for that. So we do want to give, or I do want to allow time for questions. So are there members of council questions? Yes, Councillor Risser.
Less a question than a comment, just as the Project Luneburg steering team chair, and I'm sure Don would agree. I'd like to echo what Rebecca said about the usefulness and the effort that was put into the collaboration. I think you know, it was the same thing on the other side.
Nice to hear. Working together is certainly key, and that comes back to the slide that ended the presentation about where to begin, or where to carry on from where we left off, I suppose, with that in mind. Are there other questions of council while we have our guests here ready to answer them? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Your Worship, it's, you know, there's a lot there. I think that I would struggle to endorse it like today. You know, that's going to take a lot of discussion. I was sort of asked to bring up just a minor question though to Rebecca, and that's in the Project Luneburg draft. The suggestion is that we just read it, expand the scope of Recreation Committee to include arts and cultural representation. And, you know, what's your thought on that, combining it with recreation?
Through you, Your Worship. In terms of, it depends on how you're combining them. There is definitely synergy to be found between culture and recreation, but the cultural environment and industries are not just about recreation. So on the one hand, community engagement, activities, programming, learning, interaction with residents of all ages is very synergistic with recreation. On the other hand, business development, innovation, placemaking often has very little to do with recreation and a lot more with economic development and with planning. So, and that's why, in fact, through the Project Luneburg plan, you see culture in multiple areas, and you will see our culture plan reflected in the economic development section, in the arts and culture, recreation section, and in heritage as well. So it can be found in several areas because the breadth of culture is so substantial. So in terms of committees, I think it's really important to include the breadth of the whole cultural sector in any committee that you establish. So festivals, for-profit, not-for-profit, volunteerism, paid managers in the cultural sector, visual arts, performing arts, etc. They all bring very distinct areas of expertise and knowledge and perspective to the table. If you try and blend that with recreation, you're going to have a committee that's too big. In terms of staffing, that's more complicated because always in the municipal arena, you know better than I, although I worked in the municipal sector for many years, so I do understand municipal budgets are always constrained. So how do you justify a single staff person just focused on culture in your community? And that is an excellent question. And I do think that there is value in having somebody who has all the rigor and expertise that you need for the cultural sector that you have. And finding that in one person, along with the recreation and parks and planning expertise that you might need in the other half of that portfolio, is going to be very challenging. So there are opportunities to access significant federal grants to maybe develop a position in the community for 2 or 3 years with the support of the town. That may be a way of leveraging and maximizing opportunity for expertise that you need to move your plans forward and address some of the priorities that town council establishes as it moves forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions of members of council? We do have this item further on in our agenda for further consideration and discussion. I'm not sure I can promise we'll even get that to that today, just knowing the length of our agenda, unfortunately, but we certainly will be discussing the proposal that you've left us with again further on. And there is lots of, I know I had lots of, some of them very specific questions when I went through the document, so I'm not sure it's even appropriate to raise them here about some of the language used and some of the very specific things mentioned in the document, and they wouldn't have anything to do with the principle of what's being presented, but more sort of the specific content. But truly, again, congratulations. I think this is a very important document to have, very useful, very well presented, and you know, charts and breaking the items down as you have into more bite-sized pieces is very helpful from my perspective. So if there aren't any further questions, thank you very much. Thank you, Sheila, for leading this charge and for being with us today as well. And we'll certainly, you're welcome to hang on to listen in on further commentary as it happens later. But we will move on to the next item of our agenda here and then. Thank you very much.
Worship. Thank you.
And
Thank you,
I
Your
do note that having seen it, so it's after our first hour, it's time for us to take a recess. So I would suggest this might be a natural break time to do that. So we'll reconvene at, I was going to say 3:15, and then the time just changed. So 3:18. See you all back then. Hello, hello everyone. I'll call this meeting back to order, and we will move on the agenda to the next bolded item that appears there, which is the Anti-Racism Special Committee report, committee proposal, and the staff report. So we have two authors of that report. Ms. McCallum and Mr. McDonald. So would you like to lead us through that? I'm not sure who's leading or if we're tag teaming or how that'll be done, but off you go.
Thank you, Your Worship. Both myself and Heather will be doing the presentation with regards to this memo. This memo is a response to a motion of council from the July 28th council meeting with a view to forming a task force or special committee to promote anti-racism with a particular emphasis on anti-Black and indigenous racism. We looked at some municipal action plans and we participated on a webinar on July 23rd that was undertaken by the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities and the Association of Municipal Administrators of Nova Scotia. And that was very helpful in undertaking the research required for this memo. We outlined in the report several of the different organizations and municipalities that we have got in touch with. We're also undertaking some historical research, and we're currently in the process of obtaining further research books and materials on the subject of Indigenous and African American history pre-1753. This research will help formulate background information to recognize their contribution to our area's rich history. Now I'll just pass it over to Heather, who will talk about a little bit about the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities.
Thank you, Arthur. Your Worship, so the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities, which prior to last year was known as the Canadian Coalition of Municipalities Against Racism and Discrimination. So this is a national effort formed by the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, which is obviously a nice tie-in for us as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But this coalition was brought to our attention during the webinar of July 23rd, as many of the municipalities that have put a municipal action plan, such as we're discussing, in place, have also done that in conjunction with this coalition. As a matter of fact, you'll see here, Halifax, Kentville, Kings County, New Glasgow, and Truro are the Nova Scotia municipalities that are signatories, along with as part of the 82 members, which they did as part of their municipal action plan. Membership to this organization provides a lot of support materials and templates and so on in order to develop such a plan, and it is a requirement of joining that a municipality agree to prepare such a document. There is no membership fee to join. They're just there to try and extend these principles as far and wide as possible. There is an attachment, item B. In order to join this coalition, Council makes a declaration, which would presumably be part of the committee's work, makes a declaration to join the coalition, and a copy of such a declaration is attached at the back. So in alongside of the work ongoing in Nova Scotia about developing municipal action plans to end racism and discrimination, we would suggest that a special committee be established and that membership be reached out to. Arthur will speak to this further in the next section. So the mandate of such a special committee would be essentially to develop a municipal action plan for ending racism and discrimination. And there's a few suggested items that could roll over into a terms of reference here, and the second one being to join the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities. The intention around this mandate, I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit to a terms of reference. The coalition, as well as the other municipalities we spoke to who have already developed municipal action plans, stress that it's really important that the members of such a committee have input into those terms of reference. So the way we would proceed is to create a draft terms of reference using some of the material in this report and using templates from other municipalities that council could then pre-approve, and then bring it, once that committee has been established, they can make changes and send a recommendation back to council for reapproval. So I'm just going to scroll back up here and pass it back to Arthur to talk about the composition of the committee.
Thank you, Heather. Much appreciated. As Heather noted, we do have somewhat a draft term of reference, which we envision it being reviewed by the special committee and then brought forward to council at a later time to ratify and approve. So we suggested a composition of a special committee to include 8 members, 2 municipal councillors, one of which shall be chair, 2 citizens at large who have knowledge or expertise in African, Nova Scotia, or Indigenous affairs, who may or may not live within the town proper, 2 representatives from the African Nova Scotia community, and 2 representatives from the Indigenous community, one of which should be a representative from the Acadian First Nations. That goes on to our second recommendation of the report, where it is recommended that council provide the authority to the mayor to approach Chief Deborah Robinson of the Acadian First Nation to participate directly or otherwise designate a representative to be a member of the committee. I think it's very important because I did do some research on proposed federal and provincial government grants that may help us out, and specifically with regards to interpretive panels and trying to update the history. There, a lot of those grant applications are subject to being either connected to a band directly or having the band themselves submit the application in order to qualify for those funding programs. Just to go on, under issues and options, council will be required to devote staff time and financial support to the committee. It is recognized now that such costs were not envisioned during the 2021 budget preparations, and there are no suggestions at this time for any offset savings included in this report. I recommend that council does provide some type of financial assistance to this committee under the 2021-22 budget year. I'd like to hand it over back to Heather, who will outline some recommendations of the memo.
Thanks, Arthur. So just to recap, we are recommending that council approve a motion to proceed with the establishment of an anti-racism special committee to develop a municipal action plan for ending racism and discrimination in the town of Luneburg, as described in this report. Membership is to be formed by invitation to BIPOC, which is an abbreviation for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, experts and stakeholders, and by advertising for citizens at large. Membership and terms of reference to be approved by council at a future meeting. It is also recommended that council approve a motion enabling the mayor to contact Chief Deborah Robinson of the Acadia First Nations to invite her or a representative to become a member of the committee. And just to quickly review what the attachments are, one of them is just a copy of the petition that was presented at the July meeting. And the other is a sample declaration for joining the coalition of inclusive municipalities. So that is what we have today. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much to Ms. McCallum and Mr. McDonald. Appreciate that you're getting on this issue promptly, which is was certainly our goal, having noted the urgency around this issue that was brought to us from the community through Ms. Hepburn. And so I think it's important that we that there's some momentum to be upheld, and you've provided us with food for thought on that with this report, so which is very helpful. Are there so there were a couple of motions proposed, and there's other content. Council may recall that I had the privilege of speaking at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO a couple of years ago at their annual conference with speaking about Luneburg and the impact of climate change on UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and came home with a package on the Coalition of Municipalities Against Racism and Discrimination. So they had they have a workbook, a package, which we reviewed, I believe, at council at the time. It was just one of those things that kind of fell off our radar, but was recognized at the time as being a very worthwhile endeavor. So they've made some tweaks to their program, and as I also attended that webinar that Mr. McDonald and Ms. McCallum participated in. It was very worthwhile and very nice to see, or very helpful to see, that some of our municipal neighbors in the province have been moving ahead on this initiative, and we can certainly learn from what they've done and what their experiences have been. And they've noted that there were bumps along the road, but they're forging on and making revisions if need be. And I would suggest that we follow a similar path to take on the challenge. But what are there other questions of council? Yes, Councillor Mosher.
I'd be happy to move the two recommendations, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Mosher. Recommending to establish an anti-racism committee to develop a municipal action plan, as noted, and that council approve me speaking, making contact with Chief Robinson. Is there a seconder for that? Is that Mr. Thank you very much, Councillor Croft. Discussion of the motions then. I have just one reservation about it all, having spoken very glowingly about moving on. Just my reservation is the emphasis throughout the report on focus on anti-Black and Indigenous issues. I think that definitely needs to be a priority, but I'm afraid of an exclusionary. It seems like there's an inadvertent exclusion in that when we're talking about other people of color. And certainly noteworthy in our community is a growing number of residents who are people of color. And they don't fall into either of those other categories. And I certainly think that we need to be mindful of, as new immigrants, they would probably have very different experiences, but we would want to avoid any racist, inadvertent racist practices or things in this. So, in a couple of the notes, for example, I would definitely keep the emphasis or the priority for anti-Black and Indigenous focus when it comes to heritage, for example, and making sure or history include that making sure we have a special lens put on that part of our history and make attempts to be more inclusive of that part of our history. But overall, I think that maybe we should be cautious in putting too much emphasis on specific groups in the formation of the committee. So just throw that out there. Sorry, Deputy Mayor, you've gotten small, so it's harder to see you. Yes, and then Councillor Risser as well.
A few thoughts. I think the key to stemming, whatever level the problem is at now, has got to be education, and education not only from an adult point of view, but from a even an elementary school point of view. And I'm just wondering if we and this committee should involve somebody from well, we don't really have a school board anymore, but at least somebody from the educational system, because I think that any or some of the actions that come out of this will have to be directed at educating young people. One thought, but similar to other, when you look up other directives as far as prejudices. I mean, to your point, Rachel, about, what about the gay community as well? I mean, this, I know it says anti-racism with specifics to, Black and Indigenous, but, maybe it should just be to, all inclusive, perhaps. And then I guess my last thought is, and I thought I had read it someplace, but I'm trying to find it and I can't, but was there any conversation with, I thought I saw something about conversations with maybe the town of Bridgewater, Mahone Bay, maybe even the municipality, to see if there's an interest in having a group discussion on this, and therefore maybe a group action. So.
If I may, Your Worship, there was some preliminary conversations. They indicated that they weren't quite in the same place as us at the moment. So that could very well be a recommendation that come from this special committee to investigate that further. But at least the town of Bridgewater, that I believe both the mayor and myself had some contact with, are not quite ready to do a regional organization yet, although that does seem like a potentially wise recommendation.
So I think, yeah, just to further on that, just in the interests of getting started, the town of Bridgewater has an anti-racism task force, I think, being established, if not established. And they certainly expressed interest in partnering at some point, but we're kind of forging ahead and didn't really want to sort of wait for the rest of us to catch up. And I think in a similar vein, we would want to get some of the preliminary work done at least, and that's could well be where this ends up. And I think it might be wisely in a broader committee in which we would participate, because it's a big subject matter, and presumably we would all want to end up in the same place and follow positive best practices and so on in combating racism. So yes, Councillor Risser, you had.
I just wanted to say that I found your comment very astute, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Can we just leave it to staff to amend accordingly with respect to people of color, recent immigrants, and any other groups that we feel might not be represented in that language that should be?
And I guess to follow up on that too, and on what the deputy mayor said, there is a bit of a fine line that staff might need our clarity on with respect to inclusion and diversity, and with a focus on anti-racism. And that was pointed out with Ms. Hepburn's presentation, and her concern that there's a potential for it to be so large that action may not get taken. So I guess I just throw that out there as that kind of, I think, was much of the push behind our original parameters, which were very specific to those two groups. But I do think on, further reflection, I think certainly racism in any form, which includes other people of color, need to be considered in whatever we undertake. How big the committee gets as far as inclusive of other marginalized communities might have to be figured out a bit as we go, would be my initial thoughts. Yes, Councillor Mosier. Councillor Mosier, you're still not unmuted, sorry.
Sorry, my touch didn't get the button there quite that time. Well, just right after where, you say your focus, where it declares the focus, why don't we just say, and not limited to, and that way, whatever would arise, the committee can deal with it.
That's certainly a wise and fair amendment in my eyes. I don't know if other members of council can, indicate that there'd be, and if that's understood to be sort of a qualifier, not a qualifier, the opposite of a qualifier, some leeway, I guess, in determining that, because as was pointed out in the report, I think it's very important that we have a lot of external input into the ultimate terms of reference. And so I don't want to predetermine that to the point that it is exclusionary in some way. So.
Well, this way we get to focus on the issue at hand, and yet, it can tackle any issue that will arise in the future.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful suggestion. So we have a motion moved and seconded, right? Clarifying, and it was for both motions, actually, inclusive of both of recommendations.
And Your Worship, just on that point, does that mean that the two motions are combined as one, or the same movers and seconders for two separate motions as stated in the report? Thank you.
I'm not.
I was moving both, so I can be as mover of both.
So yeah, 1 and 2, and yeah, same for Councillor Croft. So
I'll combine them into one motion, Your Worship? Or you'll vote on them separately?
Vote on them separately.
Thank you.
It matters, but maybe that might make it easier from a clerical perspective.
And are we going to make that change, in that one motion, that it's, just want to make sure our mover and seconder are okay with that, and that the group knows? Yeah.
So, and I'm just, perhaps we can clarify what the change might look like, so that it gets captured appropriately. And I'm trying to get back to that. So I'm sorry, I lost it on my screen here. Sugar. Yes, sorry, did you want to?
Oh, just that I have it up on the shared screen if you have access to that, Your Worship.
As described in this report.
I believe Councillor Mosier may have been, whoops. Oh dear.
Your Worship, did you want me to provide some draft wording?
Sure.
I didn't see it in the, I don't see it in that motion, but maybe I don't quite see it on the screen there.
Right.
I'm sorry. I believe it was in the line you're referring to was in the mandate, the proposed mandate, right here.
Right. So
not in the motion itself.
Okay. So if it's because it references as in the report. So perhaps if the clarification could be made in the report itself or in reference for the future reference to the report, that we would want to not, and the language again was not with emphasis on anti-Black and Indigenous racism, but.
And the special committee's
limited
draft
to.
terms of reference shall note that it includes but is not limited to the consideration of racial discrimination. Perhaps.
Within the motion,
But just
you're
say,
adding?
Leah, just, all you have to add there in my thoughts is and not limited to, or not limited to, just, and that's it. You don't have to go any further.
With emphasis on, but not limited to, anti-Black and Indigenous racism within the report. So that's what we would like to have further reference to. And then in the motion, the draft motion, anti-racism special committee to develop a municipal action plan for ending racism and discrimination in the town of Luneburg as described in this report. Then we could leave that as is, understanding that the report's been amended to not limit it to anti-Black and Indigenous. Is that satisfactory to council? Is that okay? All right, so the wording of the motion then wouldn't be changed. I still don't have it in front of me, but.
Sure. Just again, to clarify, your worship, after the word report in the first line, then there's an addition which will read as follows, which includes, or which shall include but is not limited to the consideration of racial discrimination.
I don't know that we need any addition to.
No addition, just leave the motion as presented by staff.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
and I'm looking for any, no, everybody's okay with that? Very good. Okay, and the other, well, one at a time. So if with that clarity, and I would assume that and just for clarity again, the advertising and so on won't happen until we have a subsequent approval of preliminary terms of reference. Is that fair? Because it's hard to advertise if people are, or would we be advertising just on the mandate for participation in this committee, or that be sometime further down the road? Just so I understand.
I believe the outreach could take a little time, Your Worship, just given the rather specific expertise we would be wanting to look for.
Right.
So developing a draft terms could probably happen concurrently with that, depending on council's preference. And then, of course, once that committee has been assembled, they would take another look as a group.
Right. And I guess I was just focusing on advertising for citizens at large. That's not going to happen really soon because we'll do some of that other outreach first.
Correct.
Okay, fair. Okay, are we ready for the question then? All in favor? And no, I don't think anyone's left to oppose. No one's opposed, so the motion is carried. And that's approved. And so then we can move right into the second motion, which was moved and seconded by Councillors Croft Mosher and Croft. And I questioned whether or not we needed a motion to do this, but I guess that kind of solidifies the authority. And so is there any further discussion required on this? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. And thanks very much to Heather and Arthur for their work on this report. Much appreciated. And lots to be done, but nice to know that we're getting started on that important work. So next bolded item we come to is 7A8, the Doc Fest grant application, and it was noted there was, with apologies that this was not included in our regular grant approval process. And the note of a remaining balance within that budget for our consideration of the ask.
If I may, Your Worship.
Certainly.
Certainly, again, my apologies that it was received on time by myself and just did not make the compilation to your meeting of the General Government Committee in June. If it had been included on the chart at that point, my recommendation at that point would have been $1,000 if I was applying the same principles as the other grants we considered that day. So just if that's helpful information for council. And again, my apologies.
Thank you very much for that. Yes. Yes, Councillor Risser.
Well, that's basically what I was going to do anyway, so I'll move that we provide a grant in the amount of $1,000.
Okay, moved by Councillor Risser. Is there a seconder of that for a grant of 1,000 to DocFest? Second by Councillor Bachman. Further discussion of this? Certainly provide a valuable service and or well, not just service, but event, and they're forging on this year. Any discussion then? You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion opposed, Councillor Croft, but the motion is carried, and so we will provide a grant of in the form of $1,000 to the DocFest for their work this year, the event this year, their virtual event, which is going to be interesting. And thanks for bringing that forward. Sorry, moving. Moving then, and I will, there is there's just one other bolded after that. So I'll perhaps with council's agreement, we had agreed to the deputy mayor's request that 8A be also prioritized. So perhaps we could deal with that next, since it's next in line. And this is a recommendation from the deputy mayor. Would you like to speak to it, please?
Thanks, Your Worship. This guide to emergency management for elected officials is sort of not a very long document on, it's sort of like a code of conduct if there is an emergency, with suggestions like, whenever you speak to the public, make sure you're speaking factually, for instance. I appreciate that we may not have had time, you may not have time to go through this. They had asked that the different municipalities take it to their councils and bring it back on September 21st. So we do have another meeting between now and then. So, we could leave it till then, I suppose, but I think we could also, if you have looked at it, that's great. And it's a lot of motherhood kinds of things, but I think we could also give we could approve it now, subject to any feedback in the next 5 days or a week or so, and if we're not hearing any, then we would take it to the next REMO meeting, with our approval. So, but it's, again, I think it's been based on some other existing things, and if you read through it, it all makes common sense. It just it explains, what the conditions are, and what our potential roles would be in the event of an emergency. So that's it.
Thank you. So you're recommending that that we approve this document.
Yes, I would recommend that.
Is there a seconder for that? It's a motion, Councillor Risser, thank you. I think I read this document when it was in the agenda package for Remo. I must confess I haven't reviewed it again since then. It's, as you say, I think it's extremely important. I think it's very valuable that we have a document like this readily available. And I think it's something that would be very valuable, especially to new members of council, to sort of get an understanding of what their role is in an emergency. And, you know, kind of like you say, although it may be sort of motherhood and common sense, in some respects, it bears impressing upon folks what their role is and how important their role as elected officials is in maintaining calm and the right, you know, sequence of events for releasing of information and all that sort of thing. So it's a very good document, and grateful that we have it in this form. So any questions or further thoughts? So we have a motion then to approve it, and I guess it's just approved as is then for our use, and would we then assume it gets incorporated into orientation of new council? Yes, Ms. Renton's indicating. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Your Worship, I'm not sure what the process is. You know, I think that there will have to be some other, I think, statement from the group, you know, once they get the approvals or denials back for this. So I guess we're just considering this a draft at the moment. And after the 21st, when I think that's when it gets ratified, and then we can incorporate into our Remo plans.
Okay, fair. Good. Thank you for that clarification. So if there isn't any further discussion, all in favor? And no one's to oppose. So we endorse the draft as it is, and look forward to receiving it for our future use in an amended or in a confirmed format. So then we are able to move on to the next item on our agenda as a bolded item, and we're into 8C, the Waste Reduction Strategy Working Group. We have their meeting minutes of June 3rd and June 17th, and of course the Waste Reduction Strategy Report, which I get Ms. McCallum to present for us. I was participated in that group, and I'm very pleased with the report, and Councillor Bachmann served on the committee as well. And there is a submission in response as well from Susan Sanford, which we were asked to consider in reviewing the report. So perhaps I'll get Ms. McCallum to give us the highlights.
Unmuting would help. Thank you, Your Worship.
Does.
So just a quick top line on the strategy document itself. It's not too many pages, 11. So just to set the stage, this is what came out of having a look at environmental stewardship and solid waste management through the General Government Committee in our previous calendar year. And this working group was put together with the mayor as chair and Councillor Bachmann and representatives from Coastal Action, the Luneburg Board of Trade, Plastic Free Luneburg, Region 6 Solid Waste Management, and Divert Nova Scotia. It was a really good group. Everyone worked quite well together, and the collaboration was truly helpful. So where we have netted out is with the strategy is that the strategic mission is to reduce solid waste in the town of Luneburg. So we increase resident and business participation in waste prevention and diversion, including single-use materials like plastic, styrofoam, etc. It just so happens I watched a webinar from Region 6 yesterday, which stressed that anytime a resident or business puts materials into recycling or compost, it is saving municipalities money. Every time an item goes into the garbage, it costs money, in addition to the obvious environmental improvements we can make. So our strategic goals were boiled down to 4: lead, collaborate, educate, and advocate. I'll just do a quick summary of each one. Lead is to ensure that the town of Luneburg leads by example by reducing waste in all municipal government work. And as most of us are aware, we already have a policy in place for use in town-owned buildings for our own activities. And some of the action items that are listed here, for instance, making a couple of updates to the solid waste management bylaw, these have already been incorporated into the work that the General Government Committee has done on this issue. Installing more public sort waste bins have also already been ordered. So some of this work is already happening. The item number 6 here about restricting election campaign signs, this is the one that I believe the response was discussing. Under our land use bylaw, we signage on properties is only allowed in the case of election signs and real estate signs. So there was a proposal here to ban election signs made from single-use non-recyclable materials such as corrugated plastic. There is currently no means of recycling this material. Sustain is not up and running in terms of being able to do this. However, having said that, the town of Yarmouth, who had pioneered this perspective, has actually put that on hold for this current election. So that may be, there's no date on here, so that may be something council can consider. Number 2, collaborate, to support collaborative efforts for waste reduction with other organizations. Essentially, this is a way for the group that sat around this task force to continue to kind of boost each other's work, so that if one of us is tackling a particular issue, the others can stay involved and help support those initiatives. So there are a couple of suggestions here under community-based initiatives and business-based initiatives that were some of the ideas and discussions of the group. One, for example, is a county-wide initiative we may want to look at, because all the other municipalities around us are participating for the first time a pilot project called Curbside Giveaway Weekend, and we have more information on that here as well, so we may want to consider looking at that. Educate, this is definitely the key to the entire thing, is developing and or promoting education programs on waste reduction and diversion. Clearly Region 6 is a real champion at this, but so is Plastic Free Luneburg and Coastal Action. So, but there are some specific things that we looked at that were important to do a bit of myth busting around what happens to our waste when it after it leaves the hands of a resident. There's a lot of incorrect information that people think that recycling that is collected goes to landfill. It absolutely does not. That is actually an offense under provincial law. Or that certain recycling items are shipped overseas. They are not in Nova Scotia. So there are quite a few items here that we could assist getting out to make sure people understand what happens to the waste stream. Also ideas about how residents and businesses can improve their waste reduction and diversion. We currently do pick up on initiatives the other groups are doing now, but obviously furthering and continuing those is what was being considered. Waste Reduction Week this year happens in October, just after our election. And finally, advocate. So these are two action items really around supporting the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities' efforts to convince the project to regulate extended producer responsibility for end-of-life management of projects and packaging. This is a complex idea to understand, so providing some public education around what this means. This is something we're already paying for in Nova Scotia, but aren't actually getting the benefits from it. And on item B, to encourage the province to extend its plastic bag ban legislation, which takes effect October 1 of this year. So that's kind of an overview of that. We do have, so our recommendation is that that council adopt the waste reduction strategy as presented in principle and refer the strategy to the General Government Committee to prioritize action items, or that it just be approved in principle from the get-go and the specific action items be discussed with Public Works, etc., in terms of application. And I don't know, Your Worship, if you would like to add anything as chair.
No, as I mentioned from the outset, was very pleased with the outcome of this committee, but also equally pleased with the collaborative spirit with which the committee did its work. And I think really, as we've already been talking about earlier in this meeting, about collaboration is really the only way forward for small communities like ours. And we've been doing a great job of that in a number of areas, and this just being one of them. So there are some recommended, yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I'm happy to approve the wastewater strategy with the exemption of election signs for no other reason than the town of Yarmouth, which we don't have the time to proceed before the election with regulating it. B, candidates need to know what they're able to do and not do, I think, fairly quickly because the date's coming up. And C, because the town of Yarmouth, who has proceeded with it, has suspended applying it because they've been taken to court on freedom of speech grounds by the Canadian Constitution Foundation. So I don't think we're in a position to go forward with it this cycle. I think it might be something that we can look at later as it works its way through the courts. But given the time-sensitive nature of candidates needing to know what they can and can't do, I think we should approve the strategy with that exemption.
So are you moving that, Councillor Risser? Moving the adoption of this waste reduction strategy in principle, with the exception of the recommended ban on election signs?
An exception or maybe deferral, I don't know what the language is, but candidates just need to know for this cycle what they're able to do.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's a point well taken. It would be an impossibility to do that for this election, this municipal election. And is there a seconder for that? Is there a second? Okay, seconded by the deputy mayor and who also wants to speak.
Thank you. A few things. And I see that Vald is on the participant list. So something that Heather mentioned that sort of struck me, and the numbers have probably changed, but I can recall at one point that landfill costs were like $70 a ton, and our processing fees for recyclables was $270. And so Heather's comment about if it goes into landfill, it costs us money, but it doesn't if it goes into recycles, didn't sort of ring right with me. And maybe Valda can explain that. And maybe it's not even necessary right now. One thought. A second thought is that, and this is in conversations with people around town, plus my own experience at the water market, is that the public bins don't get sorted. You know, you can't trust what's in them. You don't know what's in them. So when you talk about education, yeah, we really have to educate people to, if they do have the choice of bins, to use them correctly, because I doubt the town sorts the stuff out, and if they don't, then, how do we make that more consistent? Because I don't think, we don't want town employees, nor did I want my employees having to sort through, public garbage to sort out the recyclables versus the landfill stuff. So, and we're putting a lot of emphasis on these multi-use receptacles, but I think we have to really tie in some strict education with that, and some way of monitoring it, and so that if it doesn't improve, that we have to come up with some different ideas on how to manage that. And we're only talking public waste now, of course, but I had another thought, but I've forgotten what it is, so I'll come back.
I can certainly ask Valda to respond if council wants to get into the detail that was requested about costs of different streams of our waste, solid waste. So Valda, I see you there. Thanks for joining in. Is there a quick answer to that confusion about the costs of different streams?
Quick answer, no. Thank you, Your Worship, for I guess the opportunity for input. And Deputy Mayor, the answer is in real time, the $250 a ton or $150 a ton, depending on volume, it's a volume-based business for recycling, is more expensive on an operational level than landfill. But you have to remember, landfills are lifetime. So the avoided costs and the long-term costs of maintaining a hole in the ground with reporting on gases and other environmental hazards that come from a landfill are not costs that we see on your budget in a fiscal year. Whereas the recyclables move a lot quicker. We see that cost in real time. So yes, on a dollar figure for operations, you're correct in quoting some figures. Now, mind you, they're dated, so they have changed, and it depends on what facility you use. But the education that Heather took part in yesterday is the more in-depth overall cost, including environmental and social impacts as well, for some of those materials that we have to manage lifelong and for generations to come in the landfill. So unfortunately, yes, not a straightforward answer, but your dollar figures are pretty relevant. So
no, but it is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that helped. Yeah, it is a very long-term view that we would be looking for, and certainly the focus of this committee. There was lots of discussion on things like that, and lots of discussion about the pros and cons of sorting, and the reality of the public sort bins is that they're not well used. And so there were strategies that the committee envisioned about how to combat that with education and with actually hands-on. That the green team had envisioned being on the waterfront this year with green T-shirts, and to identify the volunteers as people to help visitors and remind residents that they need it to stream. And the bottom line is, if they're not there, they can't. And if they're not there, we're not providing the opportunity to abide by our own bylaws as to this is what needs to be done. So it's really on us to ensure that they have the opportunity to do the right thing. And if we only provide single source garbage bins, that will never change. And so we have to lead to the future we want to see. And that means incurring some of the realities that it isn't always going to be perfect along the way. So I really feel strongly that this is an initiative we need to support. And Region 6 was very helpful in providing a cost sharing opportunity for us to make some real headway and advancements in getting some extra streamed containers on the ground, and sort of living by what we preach by doing that. So there is a mover and seconder then for that recommendation that the strategy be adopted or approved in principle, and then it be moved along to general government. Ms. Renton, could you perhaps clarify for us all what we're looking at for a motion?
You're muted.
Sorry, just my battery was dying on the phone there. So I have, your worship, moved by Councillor Risser, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, the adoption of the Waste Reduction Strategy Report with the deferral of the proposed ban on single-use, non-recyclable material election signs, as there is insufficient time to assess and implement same. And then you were expounding your initiatives.
I think what you had captured would be the motion if without further expanding, but yes, Councillor Risser.
I completely agree. The only thing I'd add is I'd be perfectly content for staff to take this and run with it rather than go back to government committee and hold staff up.
For the adoption and implementation, we could add, your worship.
Sounds good.
The adoption and implementation. Is there any referral to general government then with that amendment? Is that envisioned? That they adopt the waste reduction as presented in principle. Sorry, I'm going to have to ask for clarification again, so I know what I'm voting on.
Well, yes, there are 3 optional motions there, your worship. Not include reference to general government committee. The second and third ones do. So,
right. To adopt the waste reduction as presented.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, that's the first one, but
yes. So that's what was moved by Councillor Risser then, with the deferral of the ban. There noted. And I'm sorry, the seconder was
the Deputy Mayor.
Deputy Mayor, right, who then asked some questions. Okay. So any further questions? Okay. Hearing none, then I'll call for the question, or I will call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? And Councillor Croft, there's some, are you opposed or no? Okay, there was a delay. Yeah, so a motion is carried and the strategy is adopted as presented. Thank you very much. Thanks to all our collaborators on that too. Very important that we keep, one part of that is to keep in touch regularly so that we can continue to collaborate in the effort of waste reduction with our partners in that. So we are beyond our 4 o'clock intended time to end. We did get through, I believe, all of the bolded items. There were, I wondered if the councillors would consider going back to the bylaw second readings that we had before us, because they've been before us for a few times, but there are 3 of them there. And I think that would be very helpful. But as I said, it's for now 18, so I don't know what people's capacity might be. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Your Worship, I can't see it's taking more than a couple of minutes for each of those, so I would suggest we give it a try.
there's no objection, then I'll move right into that to not take any more time. So the first is the revised parking meter bylaw. So it might take everybody a minute to get back to 7A2. And consideration of public submission also is to be given for the Luneburg Legion did speak to us, Donna Kelly, on their behalf at our last meeting. But we are looking for a second and final reading and public advertisement of the revised bylaw. So yes, Councillor Mosier.
Well, can we amend that, you know, to take in consideration that that amendment that, oh shoot, what am I thinking of here? Like veterans can park without paying for the meter?
So, and I would look to Mr. Burke, I guess, to let us know what that means to the second and final reading, if we make some revisions as requested.
Your Worship, I think the concern of the Legion was that we had provided an exemption for veterans or people with veterans licenses, but the overall maximum time period still applied. So what that meant is if there was a 4-hour maximum, if you exceeded that time period, then it would still apply and they could get a ticket. If the council wanted to ameliorate that provision, and I don't think you want it open-ended so that a person could park there for weeks, you could maybe say in clause 21, where it says, but this exemption shall not apply to the maximum parking time displayed on the parking meter. We could say something like, this exemption shall not apply to a vehicle displaying a veteran's number plate parked in a parking place in excess of 24 continuous hours.
So what's in the brackets at this point is, but this exemption shall not apply to the maximum parking time displayed on the parking meter. You would replace that with, but this exemption shall not apply beyond, or
to a vehicle displaying a veteran's number plate parked in a parking place in excess of 24 continuous hours. So in other words, they're not stuck with the 4-hour maximum or whatever it is, but they can't park more than 24 hours. Because the whole idea of parking meters is not necessarily to generate revenue, but to allow movement of traffic on the street so that people can get to the stores to shop and that sort of thing.
Right. So I would say we just eliminate the language in parentheses altogether. I mean, if they're there for 3 or 4 days, I can't see it happening, but if it is, and it's a veteran, I think we'll be chastised no matter when they get a parking meter violation. So I don't know that it's important to give it any qualification, but that's certainly up for discussion. That's what we have to look at. Yes, Councillor Bachman.
Thanks, Your Worship. I didn't realize the veterans exemption was in there at all anywhere. So if it was just something that was known by the people that were handing out the tickets, let's leave it at that and be done with it. Like I said, the first I heard of this was when we got the letter from Ms. Kelly. So up until that time, I wasn't aware the practice was even in place or forgiven. So if it was past policy, just forget the time frame and continue on as normal.
I think it's under the Nova Scotia Motor Vehicle Act, Your Worship, that a vehicle can't park for more than 24 hours consecutively on a street. So we just don't want to be in conflict with the provincial legislation, that's all.
So noting that therefore would then just be consistent with the motor. Yeah, okay. Any further? Yes, Councillor McGee or Deputy Mayor.
So really, we don't have to do anything with this. Leave it the way it is, if I'm understanding it.
Well, if we leave it the way it is now and approve and do the second reading, we have not done anything in response to the concern that Ms. Kelly raised.
But veterans wouldn't have to plug the meter the way it is now.
They don't well,
But
they
that was their concern.
they don't have to put money in the meter, but the idea is they were supposed to then move their car after 4 hours or after 2 hours or whatever. That's what the change said, because we were clarifying that part of it.
I'd be
So-
fine with leaving it the way it is, you know. If they park it there for 24 hours, and that's the way it is.
Well, that means a change to what we have written now.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying.
Well, I thought B just mentioned that provincial laws say you can't park more than 24 hours.
And it may be unnecessary. It's, you know, we could say something that just in compliance with whatever provincial legislation there is. And, you know, Pat and I could draft something to that effect. Yeah, Section 155 sub 1 of the Motor Vehicle Act. It shall be an offense for a driver of a vehicle to park or leave standing the vehicle on any highway for a period of time longer than 24 hours.
Okay. Okay.
We were just trying to clarify the language that, you know, there was a time restriction, and if there is none, then aside from the 24 hours, that's great. And I'm sure we can come up with drafting to that effect, Your Worship.
I'm sensing that's what people would like to, the council would like to see, that there's no need for, or that there should be an ongoing exemption for those with veterans plates.
Your Worship, if there is going to be any change from the draft that was given first reading, then you should have a motion to amend. And if that means removing the words in brackets, then so be it. But there should be a motion to amend.
Yes, Councillor Risser.
So moved.
Moved that we amend, and we've got lots of seconders, seconded by Councillor Bachmann, that the bylaw changes or the amendment that had first reading is hereby amended to remove the
Remove the words in parentheses in section 21.
yes. That, so is that understood by everybody? You find that in your document? So that just leaves it. And then, of course, we would assume that that means the provincial legislation kicks in if it's over a 24-hour period, because nobody should be doing that regularly. Are we ready for that, the question then on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Then do we have to see this one again for second reading, or how does that work? We can move it.
Your Worship, the bylaw as amended should now be given second reading. So we resolve that the bylaw as amended be given second reading and passed.
We do that right now. Moved by Councillor Risser, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, that we give the amended bylaw second reading.
I have that in.
And pass it, Your Worship.
Pardon me?
and also indicate that it's passed. I think for form, that's a good way of phrasing it, that it be given second reading and passed.
And passed, okay. So all in favor?
Your worship, I think the
Yes.
CAO wanted to weigh in there for a sec, so I just,
Oh,
Sorry, I was just saying, your worship, the first motion incorporated that, but if Mr. Burke thinks they were separated somehow, I'm more than pleased to do that.
The first, your worship, the first resolution was only amending.
Okay, well, I will have to redraft it somewhat to reflect that. That was not my understanding.
okay. All right, well, do you have a first mover and seconder for a second motion then, B, or to be?
Yes, I do, your worship, so we'll just break it in two. That's fine. Yep.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? None. Unanimously approved then, second reading and passed. The next two I think might be quicker. Hack and trolley bylaw amendment and second and final reading and public advertisement of the adoption of the bylaw amendment for that. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Croft. Any discussion on this one? Seemed pretty straightforward, I think. So all in favor?
Your worship, and who was the mover of that?
The Deputy Mayor and Councillor Croft seconded. Okay. And I think we voted, but we may have to do it again. All in favor? Again, unanimously approved. No one to counter the approval. So then we move on to number 4, street encroachment for building access bylaw amendments. No public submissions on this one. Second and final reading for this. Councillor Risser. I just need to see what it is for a second because I've forgotten that one. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Right. Adding a section. So if everyone has that in front of them, are we ready to give that second and final reading? All in favor? Any opposed? None to oppose. That's approved. Second and final reading and public advertisement of the adoption can go ahead. So thank you very much for getting through that that business. And I just double check that there's nothing else that's time sensitive. I think we tried to bold anything that was, and we'll be Councillor Risser, did you have a question?
just a motion to adjourn whenever you're ready.
The Baker request, that's not time sensitive? No, okay. Moved and seconded that there be an adjournment by Councillor Risser and Councillor Croft. Not debatable, so all in favor? Motion is carried. And our meeting is adjourned, and we will be meeting again on September the 8th, right after the Labor Day is our next public council meeting. So we'll look forward to seeing everyone again then.